Welcome to today's historical deep dive, where we don't just tell history, we feel it. We explore the titans whose ambition reshaped the world and the terrible price of their relentless will. If you love immersive, real storytelling about ambition and downfall, hit like and subscribe. It helps us more than you know. Drop a comment with your favorite Napoleon quote or the moment that shocked you most. Let's begin and change the way you think about history. You stand in the biting wind on the frozen plains east of the Berezina River, December 1812. The air is a kal, Korean for knife, evoking sharpness cold against your skin, thick with the groans of dying men, the stench of unwashed bodies, and the acrid smoke of hastily built fires that offer little warmth. Around you, the Grande Armée, once the terror of Europe, a finely tuned machine of conquest that marched to the sound of its own legend, is a spectral ruin. Ragged scarecrows wrapped in blood-soaked rags, eyes vacant, marching towards a horizon that offers only more snow and death. Their footsteps crunch on the ice, the sound tragically muted, swallowed by the vast, indifferent white landscape. The Emperor, Napoleon, the man whose name was their battle standard, the force of nature who demanded their absolute loyalty, is not here. He left days ago, racing back to Paris, abandoning the shattered remnants of his army in a calculated gamble. To raise a new force, to shore up his crumbling power base before his enemies, both foreign and domestic, could capitalize on this catastrophe. He entrusted the remains of his once invincible force to marshals battling not just the elements and the pursuing Russians, but the crushing weight of despair itself. This moment is not just a military disaster on an epic scale. It's the chilling, physical consequence of unchecked ambition. A stark tableau of hubris, frozen in time. You see the brutal price of believing your will alone can bend reality, of dismissing counsel from seasoned generals who saw the folly of the invasion, of pushing men and resources beyond the breaking point because you believe yourself immune to the laws of consequence, be they logistical, environmental, or simply human. The insight here is brutal, almost poetic in its tragedy. The higher you fly on the wings of ego, convinced of your own invincibility, the more catastrophic your fall, inevitably leaving those who trusted you, who served your vision, to freeze and perish in the snow you dismissed as a minor inconvenience. Ask yourself, was this cold calculation to save the core of the empire and build again? Or the ultimate act of self-preservation by a leader who couldn't bear witness to the ruin he had wrought? The moral reflection is stark and unwavering. Greatness pursued without empathy or self-awareness doesn't build an empire that lasts. It leaves a trail of frozen corpses and shattered faith, proving that a leader's greatest failure is often the inability to see, truly see, the devastating reality they've created through their own flawed decisions. This frozen plain is the final, terrible accounting. Flashback 8 years. You stand beneath the soaring arches of Notre Dame Cathedral, Paris, December 2nd, 1804. The air hums, thick with the scent of incense, opulence, and raw power. Around you, the assembled dignitaries whisper, eyes fixed on the altar. Pope Pius VII is here, a living relic of ancient authority, his presence a calculated move to bestow legitimacy upon the new order, a nod to centuries of tradition the revolution supposedly swept away. But as the moment arrives, something shifts. Napoleon, standing before the pontiff, reaches out. not to receive, but to take. He lifts the heavy laurel wreath, crafted from gold, the symbol of imperial power, directly from the Pope's hands. You watch, breathless. This single gesture speaks volumes. It is defiance, impatience, a refusal to be given what he believes he has already taken. He will not kneel, metaphorically or literally, to owe his crown to anyone, not God, not the Church, not even the people's representative in the Pope. He crowns himself. The golden leaves settle on his brow, a stark declaration. With deliberate grace, he places a smaller crown upon her head. He crowns her, too, not as a subordinate of the Church or the state, but as his own consort, elevated by his will, his power. It is a breathtaking display of self-confidence, audacious control, a dramatic flourish worthy of the grandest opera. This scene encapsulates the fierce independence and boundless self-belief that propelled this obscure Corsican officer from the margins of society to the very pinnacle of European power. He didn't wait for permission. He seized destiny by the throat. The insight hammered home in that moment is blindingly clear. Ambition, when fused with decisive action and a profound contempt for conventional constraints or deference, can achieve the seemingly impossible. It is the force that shatters old molds and rewrites the rules of the game. But look closer. See the isolation in that solitary act? By crowning himself, by declaring that his authority flows only from himself, he sets a dangerous precedent. He signals that counsel, tradition, even the symbolic weight of established institutions, hold little sway against his singular will. This strength becomes a seed. It plants the idea that his decisions need no external validation, setting the stage for choices made without checks, without balance, often without true consultation. The takeaway, etched into the marble of Notre Dame on that cold December day, is profound and tragic. Your greatest strengths, the very qualities that lift you highest, if left unchecked, can become the architects of your isolation and the eventual seeds of your downfall. Ask yourself, standing there amidst the gasps, was this the ultimate act of genius, or the first tremor of fatal hubris? You step further back in time. You land not on a throne or a battlefield, but on the dusty, sun-baked island of Corsica. The air is thick with the scent of wild herbs and the lingering resentment of recent French rule. Here, you are not yet a general, not yet an emperor. You are Napoleon Bonaparte, a child of a minor noble family, speaking with an accent that marks you immediately as an outsider when you are sent to the austere French military academies on the mainland. You feel the sting of this difference, the snickers at your pronunciation, the disdain for your provincial background. You are surrounded by the sons of the French aristocracy, secure in their lineage and privilege. You have neither. This is the furnace where the fire of your ambition is forged, not from inherent entitlement, but from a fierce, almost resentful need to prove yourself, to overcome, to show the established elite just how wrong they are to dismiss you. You see the young man devouring books in the library, history, philosophy, mathematics, but most of all, artillery manuals. You master the trajectory of shells, the logistics of moving armies, the science of war. You are observing, learning, burning with an energy that few of your peers can match. While others socialize or rely on connections, you are building a fortress of knowledge inside your mind, a strategy for survival and ascent forged in isolation. Here's a surprising insight. Before he wholeheartedly embraced France, young Napoleon wrote passionately about Corsican independence, even drafting a history of the island that was critical of the French. His early ambition wasn't purely for France. It was first rooted in loyalty to his perceived homeland and a desire for its recognition. The irony? This fiery Corsican nationalist would become the ultimate embodiment of French power and expansion. This relentless drive, born from a perceived inferiority and a deep-seated need for recognition, is the engine of his early success. He is not just learning to be a soldier. He is learning to control the narrative. Ambition, you realize, is often a powerful response to external pressures or internal voids. It can be a potent force for overcoming obstacles and achieving excellence, propelling you far beyond what genetics or privilege might dictate. But here, watching the intense, solitary young man, you also see the potential for this fire to consume everything in its path: empathy, moderation, even self-preservation. If its source, the initial wound of the outsider, is never truly healed or acknowledged. Ask yourself, do you understand why you strive? Is your ambition a healthy push towards growth or a relentless drive born from an old wound? Ambition untethered from self-awareness can become a cage, driving you forward relentlessly even when you've achieved everything you thought you wanted, because the original void remains unfilled. You stand on the Pratzen Heights, the spine of the battlefield, on this cold December morning of 1805. The mist is thick, clinging to the valleys, obscuring everything below. But your position here, elevated, feels like a throne. You breathe in the crisp air, the tension palpable, the fate of empires hanging in the balance. Below, unseen but felt, are the combined armies of Russia and Austria, lumbering into the traps you meticulously laid over days, weeks. This isn't just a battle. It's a grand, bloody game of chess, and you hold all the pieces, seeing moves your opponents cannot even conceive. Then it happens. A dramatic, golden light begins to pierce the gray shroud. The sun of Austerlitz breaks through the mist, flooding the heights, illuminating the scene with a divine intensity. It feels less like a sunrise and more like a spotlight, directed solely at you, confirming your destiny. Your eyes, sharp and piercing, survey the unfolding masterpiece below. You see the Allied center weakening as they foolishly reinforce their flanks, exactly as you predicted, exactly as you desired. Your corps commanders, particularly Soult, move with the precision of clockwork gears, ascending the heights the enemy has just vacated. Davout holds the line on the right against overwhelming odds, buying precious time with incredible tenacity. It is execution so flawless it feels supernatural. This is the Third Coalition, the combined might of two emperors being ensnared and systematically dismantled by the force of a single man's will and intellect. You are Napoleon Bonaparte, and at this moment, you are invincible. Every decision, every feint, every calculated risk pays off beyond measure. The battlefield below becomes an artist's canvas, painted red with the destruction of your enemies, orchestrated by your hand from above. This isn't just a victory, it is an annihilation, a strategic symphony culminating in a crescendo of Allied collapse. Standards are captured, armies are routed, emperors are forced to flee. Europe will look upon this day and see the sun truly did rise on a new era, one dominated utterly by France, by you. The insight gleaned from this blinding light? True military mastery is the terrifying fusion of intellectual brilliance, the ability to foresee, plan, and manipulate, with the absolute command over men and logistics to execute that vision without faltering. You proved you possessed both in spades. Yet this overwhelming, unprecedented success plants a dangerous seed, watered by the blood of your foes and warmed by the sun of Austerlitz. It solidifies the belief, perhaps until now merely ambition, that you are not just extraordinarily capable, but genuinely infallible. That your judgment is perfect, your will irresistible, that no force on earth can ultimately stand against you. It is an intoxicating poison, this feeling of invincibility. It subtly begins to thicken the walls of the echo chamber around you, making you less receptive to dissenting voices, less wary of potential pitfalls, less able to see the ground from the peak. Ask yourself, was this the peak of strategic brilliance, or the moment that genius began to curdle into corrosive hubris? How does a man standing in this divine spotlight avoid being blinded by his own glory? The moral is clear. Celebrating success is necessary, vital, but beware the intoxicating power of invincibility. For in its blinding light, you become deaf to caution and blind to the shadows of future failure, gathering even now on the horizon you cannot yet see. You shift focus from the sun-drenched battlefields to the damp, salt-kissed ports of Europe. You see them now. The proud ships sitting idle, sails furled tight against the elements. Along the docks, goods meant for distant shores rot on the quay. The warehouses stand silent monuments to vanished commerce. Merchants pace their offices, their faces etched with ruin, their fortunes choked by unseen hands. Smuggling, a dark undercurrent, thrives in the shadows, a symptom of the system's failure to truly control. It is 1806. From Berlin, this is his economic weapon, a vast, audacious embargo designed with a single burning purpose: to bring the mighty island nation across the Channel, Great Britain, to its knees. No nation under French influence, no nation trading with France, is to trade with Britain. It is economic warfare on a global scale, a grand design born not just from strategic necessity, denying Britain the resources and markets its navy relies on, but also, undeniably, from a deep, personal animosity towards the eternal British thorn in his side. This decision is a startling revelation of Napoleon's leadership style when faced with complex, invisible forces. He attempts to impose his absolute will on intricate systems he doesn't fully comprehend. He sees trade purely as a tool of state power, a tap to be turned off or on, without fully grasping the delicate, interconnected web of supply chains, capital flows, and individual livelihoods that constitute a real economy. The insight here is sharp, almost painful. Power grants you the ability to make decisions that ripple across the lives of millions. But without a nuanced understanding of intricate connections and unforeseen consequences, those decisions can backfire spectacularly. The system, meant to choke Britain, instead begins to choke his own allies and even France itself. Ports that relied on trade wither. Industries dependent on overseas markets or raw materials falter. Resentment simmers under the surface, particularly in places like Spain and Portugal, whose economies are devastated. Smuggling becomes rampant. undermining the decree's authority and forcing Napoleon into costly, unpopular enforcement measures. Britain, while hurt, finds new markets elsewhere and maintains control of the seas. The continental system fails in its primary objective and sows the seeds of future conflicts, including the disastrous Peninsular War. Ask yourself, was this the act of a strategic genius adapting warfare, or was it the hubris of a man attempting to command the tides of global commerce with the same blunt force he used on the battlefield? Grand designs, history teaches, require not just force of will, but a deep, nuanced understanding of the forces at play. Attempting to control everything often results only in controlling nothing but your own increasing isolation, as those you seek to dominate or protect chafe under your heavy, uncomprehending hand. The continental system stands as a monument to this truth, a grand failed experiment born of strategic ambition and personal pique. You step through the gilded doors of the Tuileries Palace, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and unspoken ambition. It is the height of the empire, and you find yourself in a world sculpted entirely around one man. Around you throng marshals weighed down by decorations, ministers with smooth, calculating faces, and a host of courtiers whose very existence depends on the emperor's favor. The silence isn't empty, it's listening. Every conversation is guarded, every glance measured. This isn't the boisterous, rough-and-tumble energy of the early campaigns. This is the polished, stifling atmosphere of absolute power. You watch Napoleon move among them. He is the Sun King here, and planets orbit him, reflecting his light. But observe closely. Where are the sharp, dissenting voices that once honed his decisions? Talleyrand, the Viper, whose cynical wisdom was often irritating, but sometimes invaluable, is tolerated only at a distance, his influence waning. Fouché, the master of spies, is a necessary evil, kept close for his utility, but never trusted. His insights now received with suspicion rather than consideration. You notice a subtle, insidious shift. The men who surround him most closely now are those who owe him everything: birth, title, fortune. They have risen because of him, and their loyalty is often a more convenient currency than truth. The robust debates of the past, where Murat might argue passionately for a cavalry charge and Davout coldly calculate logistics, are increasingly replaced by cautious agreement. Questions are framed to elicit the desired answer. Opinions mirror the emperor's known prejudices. Flattery, once a distant hum, becomes a constant melody. It's a chilling transformation. The emperor, who rose by his singular perception and iron will, is now living in a palace of polished mirrors, reflecting only the image he desires to see. This environment is the silent assassin of strategic foresight, a leader who cannot tolerate disagreement, who mistakes challenging questions for disloyalty, inevitably walls themselves off. They create an echo chamber where their own thoughts, amplified and affirmed by a chorus of yes-men, become the only music they hear. The comfort of sycophancy is a warm, soft trap. It feels good to be constantly praised, to hear your biases validated, but it blinds you to the hard, inconvenient realities that exist outside the bubble. For Napoleon, this strategic blindness, cultivated within his own court, became the subtle seed of his eventual ruin, far more insidious than any foreign enemy. It's a profound human irony. the man who could see farther than anyone on the battlefield, became unable to see the truth in his own throne room. Ask yourself, when was the last time you truly listened to someone who disagreed with you? What would you have done, sitting on that golden throne when the sweet poison of flattery became the most appealing sound? You walk the dusty roads of Spain after 1808. The scorching sun beats down, but the air is thick with a different kind of heat, resentment, fury, the quiet simmer of a nation refusing to break. This isn't the grand stage of an Austerlitz, where armies meet in decisive, dramatic clashes. This is a land bleeding, not from a single wound, but 1,000 cuts. You see villages emptied, ambushes hidden in ravines. The brutal efficiency of a people fighting for their homes, their faith, their very identity. This was the Spanish ulcer, and you witness its corrosive effect firsthand. Napoleon, the master strategist who redrew the map of Europe with bold strokes, made a fundamental miscalculation here. He saw Spain as a piece on his imperial chessboard, a kingdom whose Bourbon rulers were weak, easily replaced. His decision to depose the reigning family and install his brother Joseph as king seemed logical, a neat consolidation of power. But it ignored the beating heart of Spain, a fierce, unyielding national pride forged over centuries, and a deep devotion to the Catholic Church, intertwined with their monarchy. The French troops, marching in expecting quick victory, found themselves embroiled in a conflict unlike any they had faced. There were no front lines, no clear enemy capital to capture that would force surrender. Their foe was everywhere and nowhere, farmers by day, guerrillas by night, priests rousing congregations to resistance, women smuggling supplies or delivering messages. The conflict wasn't fought with cannons and cavalry alone, but with knives, traps, and the sheer, unadulterated will to expel the foreigner. You see the cost: convoys perpetually under threat, garrisons isolated and besieged, a constant, draining bleed of French soldiers. Tens of thousands perished, not always in glorious battle, but in brutal skirmishes, assassinations, or from disease and hardship. The best troops were diverted from crucial fronts in Central and Eastern Europe, tied down in a seemingly endless quagmire. Resources, money, supplies, morale were poured into this inferno with no prospect of extinguishing it. Here is the tragic irony. Napoleon, who had risen to power by understanding and manipulating the popular will of France, utterly failed to grasp it in Spain. He believed power flowed top-down, that replacing a king meant replacing a nation's loyalty. He saw it as a logistical problem, a matter of applying sufficient military force. But the resistance wasn't a military force. It was a popular movement, a raw expression of a people's refusal to be ruled by decree from Paris. It wasn't just a military miscalculation. It was a profound failure of empathy, a blindness to the deep cultural and spiritual ties that bound the Spanish people together. He tried to impose his vision onto a reality he didn't understand. And that reality fought back with a ferocity born of desperation and dignity. This protracted conflict reveals a crucial, humbling truth: that true leadership involves understanding the human element, respecting local realities, and recognizing that force alone cannot conquer hearts and minds. Attempting to do so, as Napoleon did here, invites a slow, painful draining of strength. The Spanish ulcer was a wound that never truly healed, a constant drain that weakened the empire at its core, proving that even the mightiest power can be exhausted by the tenacious resistance of a people who simply refuse to bend. Ask yourself, when does certainty become arrogance? When does imposing your will become self-sabotage? What would you have done, standing in his boots, watching your strength bleed away on those dusty, defiant roads? You stand amidst the vast assembling force in the spring of 1812. Over 500,000 men, the Grande Armée, the largest military host Europe has ever witnessed, stretches across the plains near the borders of Russia like a metal river ready to breach its banks. The air hums with a terrifying energy, a mix of anticipation, fear, and overwhelming confidence forged in 2 decades of revolutionary wars and Napoleonic triumphs. You hear the myriad languages, the clatter of equipment, the stamping of hooves, a thunderous symphony of ambition. There is a palpable belief, echoing through the ranks from marshal to private, that this will be another swift campaign, another dazzling victory added to the emperor's already legendary ledger. They speak of Moscow as just another capital to be entered, another peace to be dictated. You hear the emperor's pronouncements, sharp and filled with absolute certainty. He speaks of Tsar Alexander's betrayal, of enforcing the continental system, of a quick, decisive blow that will bring the unpredictable Russian back into line. His words carry the weight of destiny, the echo of Austerlitz and Jena. He walks among the troops, radiating an almost divine assurance, a man who has bent Europe to his will. How could Russia, seemingly less modern, less efficient, hope to stand against this? He genuinely believes Alexander will not dare to fight on his terms for long, that capturing the ancient capital will shatter their resolve and force a humiliating peace. This conviction is not just strategic, it's deeply personal, fueled by a growing impatience with the Tsar's independent streak and perhaps a subtle need to prove his own invincibility once more. Yet, if you listen closely, away from the emperor's immediate circle and the most fervent believers, whispers of doubt eddy through the massive encampment. Experienced officers exchange nervous glances. Veterans who fought in harsher climates shiver despite the spring sun. They speak quietly of the sheer, terrifying vastness of Russia, a land not measured in miles, but in weeks of marching. They wonder about the resilience of a people rooted so deeply in their soil, their faith, their enduring hardiness. Is it wise, they murmur, to antagonize Tsar Alexander, a man Napoleon once embraced as an ally on the raft at Tilsit? Their fragile peace had always seemed more an armistice than a true friendship, built on shifting geopolitical sands rather than mutual trust. Can such a bond, easily broken, be easily mended by force? This moment, this towering assembly of might, poised on the precipice, captures the lead-up to a catastrophic decision. It is driven not just by political aims, but by impatience with a frustrating opponent, by an escalating pride in one's own past accomplishments, and a fundamental, almost willful, misunderstanding of the adversary and the brutal environment he inhabits. Napoleon, the master of the decisive battle, the swift maneuver, the conquest of capitals, assumes Russia is just a larger version of the enemies he has already defeated. He assumes they will fight to defend territory in the West, allowing him to destroy their army in a pitched battle. He assumes conquering Moscow means conquering the soul and will of the nation. This, then, is the chilling insight. Past success, without critical analysis and adaptability, can breed a dangerous complacency and overconfidence. It can blind a leader to new realities, leading them to repeat strategies that are not only ill-suited to new challenges, but actively detrimental. The blueprint that conquered Austria and Prussia will not work against the endless plains and the Russian winter. Ask yourself, standing there, seeing the limitless horizon of Russia, hearing the emperor's confident pronouncements, yet feeling that knot of unease, would you have voiced your doubt? Would you have dared suggest that this unparalleled force might be marching towards not just a battle, but an abyss? This invasion, this fatal assumption, teaches the starkest of morals. Never underestimate your opponent's willingness to sacrifice or their unique strengths. Always respect the environment in which you choose to fight, and constantly, critically evaluate whether the strategies that worked yesterday will work tomorrow. Hubris, in the unforgiving vastness of Russia, proved to be the most expensive advisor of all. You are thrust onto the bloody fields of Berezina, September 7th, 1812. The air is thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and something far worse, ozone mixed with fear. Cannon roar like God's own thunder, muskets crack relentlessly, and the screams of tens of thousands of men become a horrifying symphony of war. This isn't maneuver. This is a head-on collision, a meat grinder of history. You command the Grande Armée, standing before the Russian forces under Kutuzov, desperate for the decisive battle that will shatter the Tsar's will and end this grinding campaign. Napoleon commits enormous resources, throwing division after division into the furnace. Redoubts are stormed, lost, and retaken. Cavalry charges sweep across fields already littered with dead and dying. It is arguably the deadliest single day of the Napoleonic Wars, a brutal testament to human endurance and folly. As dusk settles, the battle lines are eerily close to where they began, but the ground in between is carpeted with casualties, French, Russian. A horrific mix exceeding 70,000 souls. The French hold the field. The Russians have retreated. But look closely. They retreated in order. They weren't routed. Their army, though savaged, remains an intact fighting force. Napoleon has won the ground, paid an unthinkable price, but failed utterly to achieve his strategic objective, the annihilation of the Russian army. This is your Pyrrhic peak, the moment where the cost of victory outweighs its strategic value. His ego, perhaps clinging to the fact that his army holds the blood-soaked ground, might register this as a win, a grim triumph. But the Grande Armée, bled white, knows the hollow ache of a fight where survival feels more like defeat. This battle lays bare a fundamental truth about leadership and ambition. You can pour every resource, every ounce of will, into securing an outcome. But if that outcome doesn't actually advance your core strategic objective, the price paid is in vain. Berezina reveals the tragic irony of a tactical success that breeds strategic failure. It's a grim reminder that winning the skirmish doesn't mean winning the war, especially when the cost cripples your ability to continue. Ask yourself, when you strive for a goal, do you evaluate success by the effort expended or the price paid? Or do you soberly assess whether the immense cost actually propelled you towards your true ultimate objective? Don't let the brutal effort or the taking of ground blind you to the strategic void left behind a costly victory. The echoes of Borodino whisper this warning through history. You step into the silence of Moscow with the Grande Armée in September 1812. The air is thick with an unnatural stillness, a stark contrast to the clamor of your approaching army. The city, the ancient heart of Russia, is eerily deserted. Windows gape like empty eyes. Streets are barren of life. Where are the nobles, the merchants, the expected deputation with the keys to the city? There is only quiet, a profound, unsettling vacuum where victory should be. Then, smoke, small tendrils at first, almost unnoticed, rising from distant districts. Quickly, they coalesce, strengthen, erupt. Flames lick the sky, consuming wooden buildings with terrifying speed. The great city becomes a tinderbox, a raging inferno swallowing block after block, a firestorm ignited by forces you cannot command, perhaps even by the very people you came to conquer. It's a macabre, unintended coronation. The city burns as you arrive to claim it. You enter the Kremlin, the ancient seat of Tsarist power, seeking the symbolic triumph, the tangible proof of conquest. But within its storied walls, you find only desolation. Ashes carpet the floors. The throne room is empty, a hollow stage where a surrender ceremony was meant to unfold. The grand prize feels less like a victory and more like a prison, surrounded by a ring of fire, isolated in a hostile, self-immolating land. Days bleed into weeks. You wait. You send messages, expecting Alexander I to sue for peace from the ashes of his capital. But the reply never comes. The Russians refuse to play by the script of traditional warfare, where capturing the capital signals defeat. Their resistance isn't found on the battlefield, but in their willingness to sacrifice everything. Their city, their homes, rather than yield their will. It's a terrifying insight. True control isn't about occupying physical space, but about influencing the opponent's mind, forcing their hand. When they refuse to engage on your terms, when they simply aren't there, your grand strategy collapses into dust and smoke. You conquered the city, but the soul of Russia remains stubbornly out of reach, leaving you isolated with your Pyrrhic gains. What would you have done, waiting in that empty Kremlin, the scent of defeat mingling with the smoke? Was this the moment brilliance curdled into blind certainty? This campaign reveals a surprising truth. Sometimes, the most devastating move an opponent can make is simply refusing to participate in your narrative of victory, leaving you alone in the silence with your illusion of control. You step back onto the road from Moscow, the harsh bite of October 1812 seizing you instantly. The grand retreat has begun, not with disciplined steps, but with a collective groan under a sky already promising winter's cruelty. You witness the horror unfold in real time, a chilling spectacle that defies military order and shatters human dignity. Starvation gnaws at stomachs, turning faces gaunt and eyes desperate. Frostbite blackens extremities, rendering limbs useless or forcing agonizing amputations with crude tools. Each night is a battle against the cold. Each day, a torturous shuffle forward. The Cossacks are the wolves at the flanks, darting in and out, preying on stragglers, adding terror to misery. Discipline, the very sinew of an army, frays and snaps like brittle thread. Soldiers who once marched in proud formation now scavenge for scraps, abandon their weapons, and stumble along in ragged, isolated groups. The camaraderie of conquest replaced by the brutal individualism of survival. The once grand army, the instrument of Napoleon's boundless ambition, disintegrates before your eyes into a desperate, shuffling, dying mass. You look towards the center of this human wreckage, where Napoleon remains, surrounded by the shrinking, still loyal core of his imperial guard. He is physically present, the eye of this human storm, yet increasingly detached, perhaps shielded by the dwindling few still bound by duty or hope. You see him, magnificent in his coat, a figure of authority amidst utter chaos, yet grappling with the enormity of the disaster his decisions have wrought. The silence around him, the hushed reports, the refusal to look too long at the suffering passing by. These are the tells of a man confronting the reflection of his own catastrophic miscalculation. But publicly, there is no admission of the true scale of the failure, no grand mea culpa. The facade of control, however thin, must be maintained. This agonizing march isn't just a military withdrawal. It is the physical manifestation of ambition pursued blindly, leading not to glory, but to ruin on an unimaginable scale. It is a brutal lesson hammered into the frozen earth with every collapsing soldier. The insight here is searingly clear. Ignoring the counsel of those with ground-level knowledge, relying solely on personal conviction, on the sheer force of one's own will, can lead you and those who follow you into unimaginable suffering. The generals who warned against waiting too long in Moscow, the logistical experts who knew the army wasn't equipped for a winter retreat, their voices were overridden by the emperor's stubborn belief in his destiny, his refusal to admit defeat even when the snow began to fall. The inability to adapt, to admit the initial premise that Russia would sue for peace, that Moscow was the key, that winter could be defied, was wrong, doesn't just complicate things, it exacerbates the catastrophe exponentially. Every day Napoleon delayed the retreat. Every day he clung to the hope that something would change, cost thousands of lives. The road back is littered with the frozen dead, each a testament to a leader's unwillingness to face the brutal reality he created. What would you have done standing in his boots? Would you have admitted the campaign was lost earlier? Ordered the retreat while there was still some semblance of order and supplies? Or would you, like Napoleon, find it impossible to concede failure on such a grand scale, clinging to the hope of a miracle even as the world collapses around you? The takeaway for responsible leadership screams from the frozen plains. It demands facing brutal realities immediately and honestly, even when those realities are a direct result of your own mistakes. Clinging to a failed plan, pretending the disaster isn't as bad as it is, doesn't save face. It costs lives, shatters the trust essential for future endeavors, and turns a defeat into an annihilation. The long shadow cast by this retreat wasn't just the military disaster. It was the revelation of a fatal flaw in the leader himself, the man who could conquer empires but seemed incapable of conquering his own pride and inflexibility in the face of undeniable disaster. You stand by the treacherous Berezina River in late November 1812. The air bites with an Arctic fury, stinging your face and seizing the very breath from your lungs. Ice floes the size of wagons churn like broken teeth in the frigid, steel-gray water, a constant, grinding reminder of the deadly current and the encroaching Russian winter. This isn't a battlefield. It's a frozen hellscape where hope freezes faster than water. Engineers, the unsung heroes of this unfolding tragedy, work frantically, waist-deep in the punishing, freezing current. They battle hypothermia as much as the sporadic, sharp crackle of enemy fire. They are building temporary bridges, flimsy lifelines across this watery grave, their bodies aching, their fingers numb, driven by a desperate primal loyalty, a hope, however slim, that someone might escape. They know, as you watch them struggle, that many of them will pay the ultimate price, sacrificing their lives, their warmth, their very existence, so the army might have a chance. Thousands huddle on the muddy, frozen banks, a mass of shivering, starving, desperate humanity. Soldiers, yes, but also civilians, women and children, who foolishly followed the Grande Armée into the Russian abyss. They are waiting their turn for the bridges, a chaotic, terrified horde. Many will never make it across. They die where they stand, succumbing to the cold, disease, starvation, or the relentless enemy artillery that periodically tears through the huddled ranks. It is a scene of horrific chaos, unparalleled suffering, and desperate, heartbreaking heroism. This desperate crossing is more than just a brutal historical event. It's a searing microcosm of the human cost paid for a leader's grand failure. The glittering ambition, the strategic miscalculations, the hubris of pushing too far, too fast, and too unprepared into the Russian winter, it all culminates here. These freezing waters, these dying bodies, this frantic struggle for survival, are the direct, tangible consequences of decisions made hundreds, even thousands of miles away, months ago. Yet amidst this abject horror, you see the extraordinary resilience of those who serve. The engineers working until they drop, the rear guard fighting delaying actions against overwhelming odds, the comrades helping pull each other from the icy grip of the river. Human courage and loyalty, battered and bloodied, still shine through, a testament to the enduring, complex bonds that hold people together, even when everything else falls apart. But this scene also highlights the profound, inescapable moral debt incurred by the leader responsible. Napoleon, who survived this crossing, albeit narrowly, watches or directs from the bank. The lives lost here, the soldiers drowned, frozen, shot, or crushed in the panic stampede, are the direct consequence of his ambition and his miscalculation. There is a tragic irony in the leader escaping the fate that thousands of his followers endure because of his choices. While he would face consequences later, the immediate price was paid in blood and ice by others. Consider this. Leadership is not merely about strategy or victory. It is a sacred trust. The lives and well-being of those you lead are the ultimate measure of your decisions. This river crossing, a frozen testament to human suffering, serves as a chilling reminder that failure in leadership bears a heavy moral price. It is a price paid not in gold or territory, but in the souls and sacrifices of the people who believed in you. That debt cannot be evaded, not even if you survive the disaster you created. Ask yourself, standing by this frozen river, what would you have felt witnessing this carnage that your decisions wrought? What does the Berezina tell us about the true weight of command and the cost of pursuing ambition at any price? It is a lesson etched in ice and despair, a scar on the ledger of history, reminding us that the monument built by ambition is often cemented with the lives of others. Smorgany, December 5th, 1812. The cold bites like a starved wolf. Around you, the Grande Armée, once the pride of Europe, is a dying ember in the vast, white expanse of Russia. Soldiers huddle, freezing, starving, ghosts of the men who marched eastward with such hope. Amidst this wreckage, a single sleigh is prepared. You see him, Napoleon, bundled tight against the brutal Eder, his face a mask against the unimaginable suffering he is leaving behind. He doesn't linger. He doesn't issue grand farewells to the broken remnants of his once invincible force. Instead, under a veil of secrecy, traveling incognito as Monsieur de Raineville, he steps into the sleigh. The destination? Paris. Hundreds of miles away, across frozen plains and treacherous roads. The journey is a blur of speed, a frantic race by sleigh and coach, covering immense distances in mere days. It's a strategic retreat of one, while thousands endure their final, agonizing march. His stated reason, the official narrative, is brutally logical. He must return to the heart of the empire to prevent any potential coup attempt in his prolonged absence and, crucially, to raise fresh armies. The disaster in Russia has consumed the best of France. Only by forging new legions can the fight be continued. This decision, from a purely strategic standpoint, makes sense on a chessboard of empires. The king must survive to rally his forces. But history judges not just by strategic outcome, but by the chilling calculus of perceived betrayal. The act of leaving his suffering troops in the depths of a Russian winter sends a message that echoes through the snow-laden forests and into the very soul of the army. You are disposable. The leader survives, the army perishes. It's a stark, unforgiving illustration of the ultimate isolation at the pinnacle of power. The needs of the state, or perhaps the leader's own survival and position, can necessitate actions that appear, or tragically are, a profound abandonment of those who have sacrificed everything. Think of the irony. He flees to save the empire built on the backs of these very soldiers, shattering their loyalty and morale in the process. A leader's choices, even those made with calculated foresight, are constantly weighed in the balance of ethical perception. Leaving the field, even to prepare for the next battle, can shatter the very foundation of trust that wins future wars. It's a wound deeper than any cannonball, a chilling insight into the cost of absolute power. Ask yourself, would you have left? Could you justify abandoning those who trusted you with their lives? You are in the opulent, yet strangely quiet Palace of Fontainebleau. It is April 1814. Outside, the distant rumble of Allied occupation forces in Paris hangs in the air like a shroud over the dying empire. Inside, the air is thick with a different kind of tension, the palpable weight of exhaustion and disillusionment. You stand among the last loyalists, watching as the marshals, Napoleon's titans of war, file in. Their faces are grim, resolute. These are the men who carved victories out of chaos at his command, who followed him through snows and deserts, through glory and despair. But today, their eyes meet his not with unquestioning loyalty, but with a weary finality. They speak not with deference, but with a chilling, collective voice. They refuse to march another step, refuse to shed another drop of blood for a cause they know, with absolute certainty, is lost. The battlefield, the realm where Napoleon was the undisputed maestro, has been superseded by a grim internal reckoning. You see it dawn on him, perhaps slowly at first. Then, with brutal clarity, the absolute power he wielded, the authority that seemed carved into the very fabric of the world, wasn't inherent. It was contingent. It rested ultimately on the willingness of these men to follow. And their will has finally broken. This is the stark, unvarnished reality check for the unchecked ego. The emperor, who reshaped continents with a wave of his hand, is suddenly constrained, not by a foreign army, but by the collective no of his own lieutenants. He sits diminished, his ambition a cage storm. The pen scratches across the page, the act of abdication. An empire is signed away, not vanquished in a final glorious charge, but surrendered in a silent room, among men who simply cannot or will not continue. The scene that follows is steeped in pathos. Napoleon kissing the eagles, the standards of his old guard, symbols of the loyalty he once commanded unconditionally, now relics of a fading dream. His isolation is complete, abandoned by fickle allies, defeated by persistent enemies. He is finally, decisively, constrained by the very bedrock of his power, the marshals. This moment reveals a profound insight. True power isn't just about giving orders. It's about the enduring consent and shared purpose with those you lead. When that consent is withdrawn, even the mightiest edifice of authority crumbles into dust. What would you have done, standing there as the foundation of your world dissolved? It wasn't just a strategic defeat. It was the dissolution of the implicit pact between leader and led. The takeaway is stark. Listen to the limits of your resources, and more importantly, the will of your people. This silent room at Fontainebleau speaks louder than any battlefield cannon. You find yourself standing on the rocky shores of Elba, spring 1814. The sea breeze carries the scent of pine and salt. This is Napoleon's kingdom now. Not Europe, but a tiny island, 10 by 17 miles. He arrives stripped of an empire, but not of his title, Emperor of Elba, a cruel, almost farcical consolation prize from the victorious powers. You watch him disembark, the man who once commanded millions, now sovereign over a few thousand souls and a few hundred loyal guards. He doesn't waste time wallowing, at least not visibly. He throws himself into ruling Elba with the same meticulous energy he applied to France. You see him on horseback, reviewing his miniature army, their numbers barely more than a single regiment from his grand army days. He inspects the salt mines, discusses agricultural reform, orders the construction of roads, a theater, schools. He redesigns the flag, 3 golden bees on a white background, a symbol of industry and immortality, perhaps a whisper of empire's past or future. He holds court in the Villa dei Mulini, receiving visitors, planning improvements, playing the emperor on a scale that feels like a child's game after commanding a continent. But look closer. Watch his eyes when he speaks of Paris, when he receives news from the mainland, news of the Bourbons' unpopularity, of internal dissent. The ceaseless activity isn't contentment. It's a feverish attempt to mask a deeper, burning frustration. This isn't empire. This is a cage, gilded perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. The ambition that propelled him from Corsican obscurity to the throne of France hasn't dissolved. It's merely coiled, waiting. Exile reveals a profound truth. For Napoleon, power wasn't just a tool. It had become intrinsically linked to his very identity. Without the grand stage, the constant striving, the exercise of absolute will? Who was he? Elba isn't a peaceful retirement. It's a waiting room, a laboratory for plotting a return. He is like a caged predator, pacing, observing, calculating the moment to strike. The irony is palpable. The man who reshaped Europe is now obsessing over Elban customs duties. His focus on these trivial matters isn't born of genuine care for Elba's welfare, but from an inability to stop ruling, to stop exercising control. His actions here scream louder than any speech. He cannot accept this fate. This diminished reality is unacceptable because it challenges his fundamental self-definition, the man who does, who commands, who conquers. It highlights a surprising depth of his psychological dependence on external validation, on the grand narrative of his own power. Ask yourself, is this resilience in the face of defeat, or is it the tragic symptom of a soul unable to find peace or purpose outside the relentless pursuit of power? You stand on the remote, windswept island of St. Helena, a speck of volcanic rock marooned in the vast, indifferent South Atlantic. The year is 1815. This is not Paris, nor Vienna, nor the plains of Austerlitz. This is your final destination, a prison crafted by geography and guarded by British warships. 6 long years stretch ahead, until 1821, a slow, agonizing dissolution of a man who once held the world in his grasp. Life here is a relentless tide of monotony. The grand strategist who directed hundreds of thousands now finds his battles reduced to petty skirmishes with the island's governor, Sir Hudson Lowe. You see him pacing the restricted paths around Longwood House, a once terrifying figure now chafing under bureaucratic rules about where he can ride and whom he can see. Every slight, every perceived indignity becomes a major diplomatic incident in this micro-kingdom of his exile. It's tragic, almost farcical, to witness the man who redrew the map of Europe, now consumed by arguments over the quality of the wine or the size of his security detail. This is one of history's cruelest jokes, the unbounded energy of the conqueror funneled into the mundane grievances of an isolated estate. His primary occupation, the one remaining theater for his boundless drive, is the dictation of his memoirs. Hour after hour, he revisits his past, a carefully curated performance for posterity. Here, the battles are fought again, the decisions justified, the failures attributed to the incompetence or betrayal of others. Talleyrand, Marmont. Even the fickle French people themselves. He is meticulously crafting his own history, burnishing the legend, ensuring that the Napoleonic myth takes root even as his physical body withers. You hear the confidence in his voice as he describes tactical brilliance, the careful omission of inconvenient truths, the subtle redirection of blame. This is not just remembering, this is rewriting. You witness the powerful mind, still sharp, still capable of dissecting complex events, yet trapped. Reduced to fighting bureaucratic battles, and, more importantly, shaping a narrative. This relentless focus on controlling the story, even in complete physical impotence, reveals a deep, ingrained need for control that defined his entire life. It's as if the last remaining territory he can conquer is the future's perception of him. Ask yourself, is this resilience or an inability to face internal truth? St. Helena is the ultimate physical manifestation of his isolation, the stark, unavoidable consequence of a life lived without internal limits, driven solely by external conquest and ambition. When that ambition finally consumes itself and leads to ruin, it leaves the individual marooned, often left only with their ego and the desperate need to justify their trajectory. Stripped of armies, empires, and power, the drive to control the narrative persists. The final, lonely performance on a remote stage. What would you have done, confined to this rock, with nothing but your memories and regrets? The takeaway is profound and sobering. The legacy you leave is shaped not just by your achievements, but by how honestly and gracefully you face the consequences of your failures. True self-awareness might have offered peace, a measure of reconciliation with his past, but the ingrained need for control resulted in this final, bitter, and profoundly lonely act of self-creation. The coronation crown feels heavy, not just with gold, but with the absolute certainty of your own destiny. You stand at the apex, the architect of empires, the wielder of millions. From revolutionary firebrand to emperor, every obstacle has yielded to your force of will. But step back now, beyond the maps and the battles, beyond the political maneuvering and the grand pronouncements. Trace the line from that defiant moment of self-coronation to the desolate shores of St. Helena. The true turning point, history whispers, wasn't a cannon shot or a treaty clause. It was slower, more insidious. It was the almost imperceptible shift where the boundless ambition that had lifted you became untethered from reality, deaf to counsel, blind to the well-being of any soul but your own. The principle laid bare is brutal, timeless. The very force of will that can elevate you to the pinnacle can, if left unchecked, curdle into the blind, deaf tyrant that casts you into the abyss. The drive to be the sole author of your destiny is potent, intoxicating. Yet history, cold and unforgiving. You've witnessed the pattern repeat, an inexorable cycle. Ambition, sharp as a bayonet, fuels achievement. Achievement breeds confidence, solid as fortress walls. Confidence, if unchecked, begins its subtle, corrosive transformation into hubris. Hubris, like a thick fog, isolates you, making the voices of counsel sound like distant, irrelevant echoes. Isolation fosters disastrous decisions. The ill-fated march into Russia's unforgiving winter, the draining quagmire of Spain, the unsustainable pressure of the continental system, and those decisions cascade into catastrophic consequences: bankruptcy, ruin, exile, the loss of everything built. The price of this unchecked will isn't paid solely by the leader on the lonely island. It is paid in blood and treasure by entire generations, by the dreams of nations twisted and broken by one man's pride. What if he had truly listened, not just feigned interest? What if success hadn't deafened him to the warnings etched in the eyes of his most loyal marshals? What if he had built trust, a shared vision, instead of demanding absolute, unquestioning obedience? History offers no easy remedies, only the chilling echo of what was, a somber reflection in the polished surface of a grand desk in exile. Consider your own ambitions now as you navigate your world. Where do they truly originate? Whom do they affect, ripple by unseen ripple? Are you building a lasting legacy, piece by painstaking piece, or merely constructing an elaborate, fragile prison of your own making, destined to hold only you? Napoleon, adrift on his final island, cast out countless aphorisms, attempts to shape his legend, even in defeat. But perhaps the most poignant, in light of his entire sweeping trajectory, is this: Waterloo was not a battle. It was a catastrophe, a strange train of chances, a final, desperate refusal to accept full, searing responsibility, clinging to the capricious whims of fate rather than acknowledging the long, deliberate chain of choices forged by an ambition that knew no bounds, leaving him, in the end, forever isolated within the very legend he so fiercely curated.